Good morning and welcome to the webinar on supported education, finding the right support for college success. We are honored that Dr. Maria Paiwanski and Ashely Luce accepted the invitation to present today. Before I officially introduce our presenters, please allow me to address a few logistical items. I am Will Francis, Project Director for Post-Secondary Education at the UCLA Tarjan Center. The Tarjan Center at UCLA is a federally designated Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities and your host for today's webinar. Support for today's webinar comes from the California Community College's Chancellor's Office through a contract that enables us to provide technical assistance and training to community colleges DSPS who are working to provide equitable supports, services, and opportunities for students with disabilities, including intellectual disability and autism. Your participation is much appreciated. We are happy that you are here with us. Our institutions have implemented a variety of strategies to support our students in pursuit of their academic and workforce development goals. In implementing AB 705 using the Guided Pathways framework, we are more focused than ever on course completion, persistence, certificate and degree completion, transfer to four-year institution, and exit to high-wage, high-demand jobs. Some of you have added peer mentors, embedded tutors, educational coaching, and similar strategies. Today's presentation may be useful as our colleges move forward to design plans and to implement the new Student Equity and Achievement Program, or SEEP 2.0. A number of our colleagues are unable to attend today's webinar and have requested a recording of the proceedings. In order to facilitate access to a clean recording of the webinar, we've muted all calls. As we proceed through today's webinar, our presenters would love to respond to questions that arise from or that are related to the content of the presentation. Please look at the bottom of the Zoom program display where you will find a chat or text box. We are asking that you insert your questions into the chat box or in the Q&A throughout the duration of the webinar. We will address your questions and welcome you to submit as many questions as naturally arise. Our presenters may stop occasionally to address your questions, and we are asking you to insert your questions into the chat at any time. This may be a good time to test the chat function. If you would like, please insert a greeting into the chat box. I see some of you are doing that. Thank you. Now I will provide some information about our presenters. Dr. Maria Paiwanski is a program director and transition specialist at the Institute for Community Inclusion at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. She served as a training and technical assistance provider for state and national initiatives that support inclusive post-secondary education opportunities for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities, specifically college-based transition services. Dr. Paiewonsky has coordinated numerous secondary and transition-related projects, and she works with teachers, college staff, interdisciplinary team members, students and families to develop positive and inclusive college, work, and community outcomes. Dr. Paiewonsky, this is not your first rodeo with us, but I'm pleased that you joined us again today. Ashely Luce is a program coordinator at the Institute for Community Inclusion at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. She oversees the Massachusetts Inclusive Concurrent Enrollment Initiative on campus, which supports inclusive dual enrollment opportunities for transition-age students from the greater Boston area. This includes hiring and training peer mentors and overseeing educational coaches. Ashely's background includes disability services in higher education, specifically working with students as an academic coach and educational coach. She also consults with the faculty on academic supports for students. Ashely also has previous experience providing student retention efforts for students who are considered at risk. In her role within the Think College National Coordinating Center, she consults on the areas of college-based transition services and disability services. Thank you for joining us today, Ashely. And now, without further ado, here is Dr. Paiewonsky.
All right, everyone. Well, hello. Thank you so much for this opportunity to talk again about supported education. This is something that is extremely important in the work that we do supporting students with disabilities, particularly students with intellectual and developmental disabilities here in Massachusetts and actually across the country. So it's something that's kind of near and dear to our hearts. So I'm introducing myself, and I'm just going to turn it over for a second so you can hear Ashely's voice because she will answer some of the questions.
Hi, I'm Ashely. I'm the program coordinator at UMass.
Okay.
This is my voice.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So first of all, before we get started, this is just an opportunity for Ashely and I to let you know that we are part of the Think College National Coordinating Center here at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. If you haven't heard of Think College, hopefully you have, you might know then that we provide all kinds of training and technical assistance to people who are getting funds to do this work, as well as many people who are not getting the federal funds to do this work. So we answer lots of questions from all kinds of stakeholders about how to get started, how to address issues, how to find funding, and most importantly, how to make sure that students are having a good, positive post-school experience that's going to lead them to the kinds of goals that they want. So Think College is a lot of research, as well as the training and technical assistance, and is also sharing all kinds of publications to make it possible for people and make it as easy as possible for them to expand this work. So that's just a little bit about Think College. So what are we hoping to do today? All right. Basically, we're really hoping that we are sharing examples and giving you ideas about how to build your supported education methods in your higher ed practices. And also we are hoping that you will think about 2 new ways to incorporate these supported education strategies as they align with your work. And Ashely is going to be sharing particularly some strategies that she uses with students and, with peer mentors and educational coaches to support their work. So I always like to start just with this slide. To make it clear what we're talking about when we talk about supporting students with intellectual developmental disabilities, because that really is the focus of the work that we do, although we know that the practices we're using really benefit so many other students. But the way when we first get started with this work, especially in new colleges, oftentimes people are thinking that we're talking about a traditional way of going to college, which means you're taking tests, you are writing essays, and you are degree seeking. And you are seeking, if eligible, you are seeking reasonable accommodations from disability services. And that is really kind of the more traditional way of thinking about going to college and matriculating in college. But other students, particularly all the students that we find near and dear to us at Think College, are those students who might be accessing college in a non-matriculated way and an alternate way. And what we mean by that is they are not necessarily taking placement tests, they're not completing a high school diploma before they enter, but they might be using like person-centered planning to articulate their goals. They might have an alternative credential opportunity or a certificate, and they might be doing something different than seeking out a degree, although it doesn't mean they're not, but many more probably are using an alternative approach to completing a course of study. The other thing is that, and this is what this presentation is really about, is those individual supports and plans that are helping students to provide what we call those wraparound services that are helping them to be successful at college, to pursue their employment goals, and to use peer mentors, as well as educational coaches to be successful. So I always find it important to kind of define what we mean by supported education. And really what I mean is that this is a model of support that really has been adopted by a number of institutes of higher ed, including many in California, Temple University. The idea of supported education actually sort of evolved out of Boston University, supporting students with mental health or psychiatric disabilities more than 20 years ago. So it's a model that we have adopted, but it's not new to people that are supporting students with IDD. So supported education really is this process of helping students with disabilities to reach their personal educational goals. Pretty simple. It's also meant to provide encouragement and to connect students to resources at their school and in their community. So we see supported education as being pretty, it doesn't have to be permanent. It might be, but it doesn't have to be permanent. It could be that you were providing some supported education for a few weeks, maybe one semester, or maybe the first year of a student's academic experience at college. I think one way of thinking about it too is the way that it's defined, and this actually came out of the original work out of Boston University, that supported education is really grounded in 3 principles. First, it's increasing individual skills. Second, it's increasing support from the environment. And finally, it's maximizing the fit between the individual and the environment. And a lot of people might look at that and say, those seem to be a lot of the principles of universal design. And that's true. These really are, these principles really dovetail. It's really, how do we make sure that students are individually supported, but how can they find the natural supports in their college environment? And then how do we maximize that fit so that we can fade support? And that's kind of how we are looking at, that's the definition we really like about supported education. Why is it necessary? Well, there's lots of different students at colleges that would benefit from supported education. And I presume that many of you know that. But for one thing, the way this really got started was to help address the stigma and prejudice that some students feel in college, and that makes them feel like they can't do their best work because of that stigma that they have. It addresses the fluctuations in student need for accommodations and assistance. So a student might benefit from supported education, which also includes accommodations and assistance. And eventually you might be fading out some of the support as they are getting accustomed to accommodations and assistance. It really benefits service coordination, particularly for some students who would benefit from having a small team of people support them at college. It has an impact on disability, on academic success. And that's one of the things that students often say, is that they feel that they have benefited from that supported education from either a coach or a mentor or a tutor, because it's helped them to sort of transition and really better understand the expectations of being a college student. And also there's a need for improved employment and educational outcomes, and supported education is one of those models that really seems to help ease students to rise to those expectations for employment and educational outcomes. The way we like to think about supported education is really thinking about the wraparound services that can address 3 types of challenges that students may have at college. One is access issues that happen, the challenges of access in college. The second is retention issues. And the third is outcomes. So I'm going to move into each of these right now. So first off, in a supported education model, a student may benefit from having support as they access and orientation to the campus. So they may go through the typical college orientation, but maybe they have a supplement, a second one, where they can ask a few more questions or have another review of the orientation. It might mean having a contact person on the campus. And I would say that most of the students that we work with appreciate having a contact person, especially their first semester or their first weeks, at least, to have a contact person. It's helping them to learn how to use resources on the campus. Many students with or without disabilities may not be used to using typical college resources. They may need additional support for registration and also support navigating transportation. So those are some of the initial ways that supported education can support that access to college. As far as retention goes, educational and supported education can help with that kind of ongoing support. As I said, there's some students that may never need more than like a week or 10 days of support on the campus, but other students really might need more, like a semester or even 2 semesters to really acclimate to college. Many of the practitioners that we know across the country are finding ways of using priority registration to help students to access the kinds of classes that they need. Especially when they are not matriculated students, sometimes that automatically puts them into a second category of student where they might have to, unless they get a supported education model, they might be waiting until the very end to be able to register for a class. And with supported education, one of those practices sometimes is finding a way of working with the registrar or assistant registrar to get priority registration to help students. Supported education also helps with tutoring and peer counseling. So the tutoring might come from like an academic coach or a tutor, but a peer counselor might even come from a peer mentor. Supported education also recognizes the importance of the social activities and the social navigation that's so helpful for students learning how to be not just coming to the campus, taking a class, maybe eating lunch, but really learning how to engage in the community and on the campus. And then also how to access other mentoring programs, because the idea behind the supported education is that you eventually might be able to fade, and maybe you are helping students to connect to more typical mentoring programs that are available to all students on the campus. And then finally, another barrier sometimes is the outcomes, getting to the outcomes for college. Supported education can really help with the service coordination. And for some students, that might just mean really understanding the difference between the registrar's office, the bursar's office, the disability services office, the tutoring, the academic support, as well as the student activities office. So sometimes that kind of supported education is everybody sort of being aware of how to support students to fully appreciate all that's available to them on the campus. Skilled academic counseling, which sometimes, especially the students that we often are supporting, are not used to having that kind of academic counseling. And in a supported education model, one of the things you're trying to do is direct students to learn how to use the more typical academic supports that are on the campus. Also getting a plan for a course of study and a credential, as opposed to just taking one class, or building on trying out classes. The idea is to get to working on outcomes that you are really looking at a course of study, getting a learning plan, and working towards some kind of credential. Another piece, when we first got started with this work, so many people were very focused in on the academic access for good reason. That was the most challenging part of this work, is getting access to courses. But what we have really talked about is how much this should also be including career development activities and connecting with career resources. And another part of supported education is that ongoing monitoring and coaching that could be fated. And that's another thing that we really emphasize in supported education is the extent to which we can help to connect students to natural supports and fade the more formal supports of supported education. Bottom line, supported education programs can be successful in many different agencies and settings, serving consumers who have differing characteristics, tailoring services to population needs, and complementing existing resources. And the reason that I'm putting that out there, you see that goes back to 2004. That's when this was originally conceived as a support system for people with psychiatric disabilities. But even then they knew the wraparound services we're talking about are services that and supports that really can benefit a very wide range of students. So now I'm just going to backtrack a little bit and say, well, why not see what disability services can do to support supported education, and talk a little bit about how that might not be so easy for more typical disability services offices to provide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, just show you a few slides on some statistics, on the work of disability services offices and who is accessing those. So I hope you can see this slide. I've tried to just highlight what I'm really trying to say here is that as late as 2019, with this is the latest data that we have. What you're looking at is, let's just look at undergraduates, that 19.4% of students that are on the college campus are accessing, have disability. And that is a pretty big number. And it's also a number that many disability services offices will tell you, this is what keeps us very busy. Just with the kind of typical accommodations that we can provide. So I'm just going to move on to show you. So now you see, okay, you've got that 19% of the student population might be accessing disability services or might be eligible there. They have their students with disabilities. And when you look at the kinds of accommodations that are being provided, you can see 48% might be using sign language, offices might be using sign language interpreters. Another big one is faculty provided written course notes or assignments, which now is probably digital notes, adaptive equipment, readers, very, very personal attendance, maybe for someone with a physical disability who is eligible for one. Digitally recorded books, 66%, but that is kind of what you're looking at when you're looking at the typical accommodations that disability services offices can provide. And then when you're looking at the kinds of various services and accommodations, again, you're looking at large print or braille, the kind tutors, alternative exam formats, maybe career services, but more likely here's an increase in priority class registration. So those are kind of like supports that disability services can offer. And these are all great. But when we talk about the kind of supported education I was describing, that's not necessarily something that they may have a lot to do right there with just providing these accommodations that students are eligible for. Bottom line, one of the things some things to keep in mind is about the staffing of these disability service offices. It's an average of 1 full-time staff in a disability resource office supporting campuses with 1,500 or less students, with an average of 13 full-time staff for campuses with 30,000 or more students. I mean, that's 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 a big ratio there of staff to students. Equally, the budgets can be vary widely. So 23% of disability resource offices receive funds from the campus foundation office, including private foundations. So it really varies as to how these offices are funded. Something else too about students who are registered with the disability services offices, there's great variation. And on the campuses with less than 1,500 student enrollment, disability resource offices report an average of 94 students with disabilities registered with the office. And for campuses with either 10,001 to 19,000 student enrollment, the average is 752 registered students.
Maria, we did have one question in the chat. The question is that NCES data of 19% is higher than I've seen in my research. This is from Lisa. Granted, my data is prior to COVID. I wonder if more people with disabilities are beginning to use services since this is from 2021.
That is a very good question. I'm not sure if anecdotally, I would probably agree with you. I don't know if Ashely, yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. But I'm not sure what the data is right now.
Yeah. Thank you for asking that question. Okay, let me see if I can move this. Okay. Finally, one little more piece of data. According to the American Institutes for Research, 46% of students with disabilities who graduated from high school enrolled in a post-secondary institution, and only 40% of those individuals completed their degrees or certificates within 8 years. Okay, that might not be very surprising to anybody. That might be research that we've heard. But the next part of that is, what's the disparity? Well, a recent survey concluded that even though 86% of universities enroll and educate students with disabilities, only 24% of the schools polled say they offer those students assistance to a major extent. I say that because you could see why. They've got their hands full. There's a lot of students who are maybe eligible for accommodations. Maybe they don't all seek them out, but many do. And Disability Services Office have a lot of responsibility supporting a great number of students on the campus. So I'm saying all of this to set some context for why investment in some supported education can benefit many students who are going to college, who may not alone be able to be successful with just, and I don't mean just, but with the accommodations that disability services offices can offer. They may need more and can be successful, but they may need more than disability services offices are required to provide.
Maria, we did have a couple more questions just about that data of 19% of college students. I don't know if you want to go back to the slide. The question is that of college students are using DSPS support nationally, correct? So this is nationally, yes. And then that is very reflective of the percentage of individuals with disabilities outside of college, correct? This is only in college, right?
These are students in college, in students enrolled in post-secondary institutions.
Okay. And then the slide that mentioned 900 students using services out of 10,000, that is not 19%, or Lisa just clarifying the math for that.
Yeah, let me be clear about one thing. So what I was able to find is this data is obviously very fresh, new, and recent, 2021. This data, I could not find more updated data than the data that we were talking about here, I think. Was that right?
Yes.
Yeah, so I don't think we can compare these two, but because I couldn't find more updated data that aligned with this data right here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She just mentioned that in the general population, they're estimated to be 20% of people with disabilities. So that 19% is very close of to that. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, I will go on, but of course, please stop. And thank you, Ashely, for keeping the questions front and center. All right, I use this slide just as a way, and this slide was something that I had developed as we were starting to expand the number of opportunities, expand the number of colleges that were curious and wanted to establish some inclusive post-secondary ed services on their campuses to support a wider range of students, including those with intellectual developmental disabilities. But really we're concerned about the demand that would place on disability services offices. And this is really where we began talking a lot more about supported education. So what I use this slide to say is it's understood that students may be eligible for disability services. But going back to that team, that supported education model that says they may need like more of a variety of supports and resources, this is what I try to say is I understand the student has responsibilities, faculty has responsibilities for good teaching. Disability services main responsibility is the accommodations, and the outcome is that students will then learn how to use those accommodations, that a program coordinator is really the one that's really helping with the academic advising. But those two that I'm showing you, the ones that have the arrows there, these are the ones where we're saying, this is what makes this model a little bit different, because we're talking about students who may need extra academic coaching, and they may need peer mentoring, or let me put it this way, they may benefit from both those things, but particularly they might benefit from the peer mentoring as someone who can really help them navigate. So we are not looking to fatigue disability services as much as to say, but we do think that a supported education model can include some kind of academic coach or educational coach and peer mentoring. And those are the two things that we're talking about here. So again, why I put a screenshot of this guide here on supported education, because I think, if I'm not mistaken, this comes out of, and I think I put the citation at the very end, but I think it comes out of California. So why adopt supported education practices? Okay, so one is it increases class enrollment and completion. It can really help to support students to succeed in their classes. It's going to increase self-esteem when they have this connection, this person that they can connect to, or people that they can connect to, or helping them to navigate the campus. It provides a greater ease in the transition to more typical campus activities. And I think you're going to hear Ashely has included some interviews where that's exactly what a student is saying. This person helped me to better understand what I could take advantage of on the college campus. And that there's no greater use of educational accommodations that they're entitled to. So again, we're not looking for students to have any more access to those typical disability services accommodations, those accommodations they're entitled to. What we're saying is some students might benefit from the supplemental supports that they could get. So again, the access, retention, and outcomes, I'm just reminding you of that as I say. So how do we make this, how could you look at this in a more concrete way? So let's just look at increasing individual skills as the first part of supported education. And again, that might be really preparing for academic success. And the students that we often are talking about, these are the students who are really learning not just what a syllabus is, but their responsibilities when they have a syllabus. Things like class engagement, how to prepare for class engagement, and how to access academic tutoring. These are the things that supported education, like an educational coach, can help a student with. It might be helping a student to manage their own schedule, something that's fully expected of a college student, but not always expected of a student with a disability who may have had a lot of support to be directed to their schedule as opposed to managing their schedule. Or finding ways to expand their college experience beyond courses. So that's one of the things that we really work on a lot, is helping students to have a richer college experience by not just going to classes, but learning how to access the resources and also to be part of the campus community. When you're talking about increasing support from the environment, that might be helping students to find those resources, those natural supports that all students on the campus have access to. It might be supporting a student to meet with an instructor, something that is not always easy for a student with a disability who was accustomed and had the right to have somebody communicate for them. Now, when you're in college, you're expected to communicate yourself, and they might need support rehearsing how to have that conversation or communicating a meeting with an instructor. Or maybe something like using a college app to find information and resources. Most colleges now have their own apps, and that might be, how do I learn how to get support from my college environment? The app might be one of those ways. And then when you're talking about maximizing the fit between the individual and the environment, okay, that might be really promoting universal design for learning. And so for many of you who might be working with faculty, or you are faculty, you would know those principles of UDL that are on college campuses and how they benefit many more students. It might mean a program of study that meets the needs of the students. So many students, especially students with intellectual and developmental disabilities, who might need a different approach to earning a credential of some kind. It might be paying a little bit more attention to a supported education model on how to develop a program of study that both meets their needs and meets the needs of their future employer, or employers, I should say. And also maybe it means support, the supports that meet the needs of the student to be successful. And those are all ways that a supported education model is maximizing the fit between the individual and the environment. Okay, I am going to turn this over to Ashely now, so give me 1 second to stop sharing my screen. And I'm going to turn it over to Ashely.
Okay, so now I'm going to be talking about different supported education options. The two that I'm going to be focusing primarily on are peer mentors and the use of ed coaches to support students. A lot of what I'm going to be discussing is applicable to peer coaches, if you have academic coaches who are peers, or e-mentoring, so remote peer mentoring. So what is an educational coach? So an educational coach supports students in assuming the typical role of a college student. Coaches help students to understand themselves as learners in the classroom. They support appropriate classroom behavior, organizational skills, and navigating and accessing resources on campus. Educational coaches teach students how to advocate for themselves and provide natural supports as minimally as possible. So as Maria mentioned, what we're really doing here is helping the student access everything that's naturally on campus. Educational coaches' responsibilities. So ed coaches assist with travel training and campus navigation. They assist with the inclusion in campus life, including student access to course content and campus resources and activities. Ed coaches provide strategies for study skills, test taking, note taking, time management, and organizational skills. They encourage problem solving and decision making, allowing students to be as independent as possible in the college environment. They review and encourage the use of accommodations and make appropriate curriculum adaptations to fulfill course requirements for audit status. Ed coaches strategize with the student on how to communicate with faculty regarding accommodation plans, attendance, and fulfillment of coursework. So when it comes to ed coach training, there are 3 things that we will review with coaches who are attending with a student. The first being the student ed coach agreement, where the roles and responsibilities of both parties are reviewed. So the student will share what they need support with while they're on campus, whether that be navigating or just, connecting with a peer, speaking with their faculty. And then the ed coach then will know during their time together on campus where they will be needed to support the student. Next thing that I'm going to review on the next slide is a student intake form. This form is something that is very common in disability services offices, but what we did is we did tweak this form a little bit to encourage, to showcase more of the wraparound supports that the ed coach is providing to the student, and also how there's a section on there about the student's interests, which I'll share. And lastly, a lot of the times our ed coaches will need a little review of just faculty expectations. Some folks may not have been in college for many years. They may never have gone to college. So learning the difference between high school and college, what faculty expect of students, and really how they can best support the student in the classroom by embedding themselves in the natural supports that the professor is providing and the disability service office is providing. Especially for students who take classes for audit, a lot of times the lines might be a little blurred in terms of what the professor is expecting, how the student can approach the professor. So those are all things that are covered with the ed coach. So this is a sample of an intake form that we use. And if you see on the top here, this shows the supports that Mark would benefit from as outlined on their program application and their IEP documentation. So for example, Mark would benefit from a breakdown of complex assignments and tasks, repetition and review, and frequent check-ins. So right then the ed coach will know, okay, these are some things that I should keep in mind while working, some strategies to keep in mind while working with Mark. We like to include students' interests on here because ideally, as this is support education model, we want the student to be connecting with their peers, connecting to campus in all aspects, and that includes their personal interests. So I include a little blurb here, just so you know, Mark's interested in playing basketball, he enjoys listening to music. This is just a little blurb about Mark. Due to a lot of staff turnover as well, sometimes we run into the issue where the same ed coach may not be attending as frequently with the student. So with this document, we always revert back to it and share it with whoever is working with the student, so there is more consistent work being done and everyone just knows who the student is and what they need. And lastly, we'll review the ed coach support section, kind of demonstrates specifically what the ed coach will be doing with the student. So for example, taking notes during class for Mark to review after class, and reviewing the classroom material and demonstrating them in a way that Mark can understand, like breaking assignments down into smaller tasks. And lastly, so our disability services office at UMass Boston is called the Ross Center. So the Ross Center accommodations are outlined at the bottom of this form. And what we do is after the student has their intake appointment with the Ross Center, we will check off what accommodations that student was approved for to access. And if they are not receiving those accommodations from the Ross Center, on the right here, what we'll do is we'll write down the alternative. So, okay, if Mark is going to have his coach with him in class to take the notes for him, then he may not be accessing the note-taking accommodation that he was approved for with the Ross Center. So again, it just confirms all of the supports that the student is receiving, and breaks it down into different, so you can really see where it's coming from. And here's an example of ed coaching in practice. So for example, Mark has a question for his professor, and his ed coach assists Mark in logging into student email and drafting the message. A second example, while working on an in-class activity, Mark discussed with his coach the best way to ask a classmate to work together. So the peer mentor piece, peer mentors serve as a role model and liaison between his or her mentee and the campus community. Peer mentors support access to campus and community resources. They act as social navigators They support mentee in goal setting and attainment, attend social activities and events on campus, and they model self-determination skills. And there's a photo here of some current students in our UMass Boston Macy program and their peer mentor, or one of our peer mentors. So for peer mentor training, some topics that we cover is our overall program goals. We also cover people first, language, and basic etiquette when working with students with intellectual disabilities. And then we review the student that they're working with, specific interests and goals. So this can be mirrored, that's also referenced in that intake form that I showed. So for example, if I have a student who's working on connecting to offices on campus, then I can share that with the mentor so that the mentor knows, okay, this is something I can keep in mind as something to do with a student on campus, and just to share how I use that office on campus. Me and the mentors will meet weekly and we'll discuss the social and academic progress of the students who they're meeting with. And we plan for campus engagement, social activities, and connections to campus resources. We also have an activity worksheet that we will review together. So this is an example of a peer mentor activity worksheet that we use. As you can see on the left here, it just shows different activities that the student can do with their mentor. And on the right is just notes for the mentor to take based on their experience and how it went. Like I said before, so we actually had a student in the program whose goal was to visit career services. And this was something that was noted with the mentor during their work together. And it even broke, well, you'll hear from Bella later, but this, so a lot of times it might just start with an intro to the office and not going straight to make an appointment. So it's more intentional peer mentoring and really taking the time to just include little tidbits about it. Strengths and goals makes all the difference, and it really keeps the mentors thinking on their toes while they're working one-on-one with the student, just of, you know, the student's background. And now we're going to hear from Bella.
Generally, I like to introduce the idea of the resource a little bit in advance, and it varies by student how much time it takes to make that adjustment. But maybe one meeting I'll tell them about a place on campus or a resource they might benefit from, and then I'll suggest checking it out sometime, and like kind of transition into the idea of going before we go so that they feel prepared for it, and they can enjoy the space more or get more out of the resource.
Ashley, we may need to increase the volume for the next one here.
Okay.
I know you typed it all out. And before we get going, there was a question.
Generally, I like to
Sorry about that. Go ahead.
That's okay. Was there any liability issues regarding boundaries and or potential abuse between the peer mentor and the student? Before I answer that, Ashley, do you know, in your own direct experience with peer mentors, have you come up with this or prepared in any way for this?
We do have our students sign a confidentiality agreement, and we do require the students to share pretty, you know, detailed notes on their time with the student. But similar to that student ed coach agreement, the power is really in the mentee. It is not on the peer mentor. So if a mentee is feeling like the relationship between themselves and the mentor isn't the best, then we take that into account. And we do frequent check-ins with the students who's receiving the peer mentoring too. So I would say we haven't encountered it, but those are a couple things that we have in place to prepare in case that were to come up.
And I would say that at the state level and also at the national level, I think that it very much resembles what other people are doing, where they're going through much more training with peer mentors and also including confidentiality and student rights. So I do think that there is more. I think they're getting a lot more training than they used to be a peer mentor. Somebody also asked that question about paid. That is kind of all over the place. Some people do not pay peer mentors. They are giving them like free training, and they are doing this more on a volunteer basis. And they might be, the issue with volunteering is sometimes you don't get the commitment that you need. So some people have kind of built up like some rotating coaches so that there's always someone available to be a peer mentor for a student. But other people don't believe that you should be paying people to be a peer mentor, which I totally agree with that. At the other side of it is sometimes people get concerned about the commitment and feel like that's a way of giving people a stipend if they can learn how to be a peer mentor for a student. And I would say that oftentimes after one semester, a lot of students don't necessarily feel like they need that pay. They're committed to it. But it is still really very much depends on the philosophy of the services and also what's possible. Thank you, Will, for dropping off the link to the PowerPoint. We did share that ahead of time. And give me one more second. I think, did we miss another question here? Background checks. I'm not sure if all people do that. It's not unheard of. I don't think Ashely is doing it. I don't think that people are doing it. Are you?
We aren't, but I'm not sure. I don't think at UMass student employees have a background check. Yeah.
But it's not unheard of that people ask.
It's not unheard of. No, I've heard of other universities. A lot of the community colleges will do background checks for every position.
Mm-hmm. Before we move on, let me just see if a student is qualified for financial aid, we could have a student become a student worker who's in our third year of the program for internship hours. Thank you, Laura. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, we'll go on, Ashely.
Okay.
Generally, I like to introduce
All right, so peer mentoring in practice. So here's an example of peer mentoring. So Will wants to meet new friends on campus, but when he approached a student in class, the student shared that she was taken. Will was upset by this and shared his experience with his peer mentor. Together, they discussed strategies for meeting new friends, and the mentor explained what the student could have meant by taken. So this is actually a real example that happened just a couple months ago with one of our students who his goals are to introduce himself to more classmates. And as he was leaving a class, he did approach one of his classmates and this happened. And what was the mentor, who actually is Bella, was really impressed by was just how much of a conversation he wanted to have and how detailed and how willing he was to share his experience and how he felt afterwards and moving forward, how to navigate that. So it just shows that there's a lot that happens naturally in that mentor relationship that you don't plan for. And that's something that I'm sure all students would benefit from if they have a social interaction that might have been a little upsetting or confusing, that they would all benefit from someone to speak with about that. So now we're going to hear from Tatiana. Let me make sure my sound is all the way up.
What's it like going to UMass Boston?
UMass Boston, when I go to UMass Boston, my college classes here at the Macy program, I feel more independent. I can explore the campus. I can meet with my peer mentors, like text with them, go into different activities, go into different clubs that they have.
Awesome. How has Trisha, your ed coach, helped you?
Trisha, my ed coach, has helped me at my high school, which is called Somerville High School in Somerville, Massachusetts, where we review notes together. She even takes notes in class at the day of the exam. She will give me the notes, and I will use those notes for my exam at the Ross Center.
What is most helpful about having a peer mentor?
Most helpful for me for having a peer mentor, you got to explore games. Like recently, a couple months ago, like one of our old peer mentors invited us to a basketball game. So I went with.
Oh, sorry about that.
I went with me and another friend from him, and we supported him, and we met one of our peer mentors there. My peer mentor has connected me with campus by text. We text each other when I arrived on campus. We text each other, so then we can plan where we can meet, we can have lunch together. She can help me with homework if I don't understand.
Awesome. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
She also helps me, like if I don't know where my new classroom is, you can ask them where your class is, and she showed me where my class is.
So as you can see, Tatiana has such a great perspective of how she's used her supports with her peer mentor and her ed coach to access campus, and just asking questions like, how do I get to my classroom? And even just the note taking that the ed coach is willing to share.
I think too
What's
that
it like
I'm
going to
sorry.
UMass
Oh,
Boston?
sorry, Maria.
that's okay. That's what happens when we have the video. You have to kind of click over it to get to the next slide. But it does start with the video again. But one thing I really like about what Tatiana is saying, and this is something that for us is like, yay, is getting that chance to participate in an evening activity, to go watch a basketball game and to do it with a peer mentor, because that is the challenge that we have, is getting students to engage in activities, you know, besides class and the lunch and maybe something in the afternoon. And so for us, this is a win-win for us, that she is able to talk about, you know, participating in an evening activity.
We did have a question. We can share those resources that we shared, the intake form and the peer mentor training.
What's it like going to?
Sorry. And this is another peer mentor training on Think College.
Yeah, this is actually developed by peer mentors at Virginia Commonwealth University. They actually, after I think like a year of supporting students, these are college students who developed their own tutorials on how to support students. So Think College has highlighted these because these are actually generated right from the field.
And then e-mentors, we do have remote peer mentoring as well. And we haven't had many students attend, but what a big pull is that they know there's somebody who's available with the answers to any questions whenever they need, so they can log on whenever they need to, days when that they are not on campus. But I will say a lot of our mentors and their students feel comfortable sharing their phone numbers, so they do speak to each other, as Tatiana kind of explained, after classes and when they're not on campus too. That is also something that I should mention is reviewed during the training, because it's an interesting kind of line for the position, because all the mentors end up being very good friends with the students, but just making sure that the mentors are aware that they don't need to share anything that they don't want to, and that their college experience might not be the same for our students.
We also have a comment from Julinda Holmes Tolbert. Peer mentor can be paid through work study if the peer mentor student qualifies. And I know you've done something kind of similar, Ashley. I wonder if you wanted to respond to that.
Yeah, so students can be paid through work study. At UMass Boston, we actually had a collaboration with the Career Services Office this past year, where it was an apprenticeship opportunity. And this was offered through Career Services, but what they did is just picked up our peer mentor position and then shared it as an apprenticeship. Students were able to access more for the career development opportunities in addition to their role. So they were participate in workshops, and this method also made us reach students who were like education majors, psych majors. So what was interesting is the mentors are actually tasked to complete their own set of goals through the apprenticeship, while our students were completing their set of goals with their peer mentor.
I think, Ashley, one thing that you have said, and I know this to be true, that a lot of peer mentors, people think, well, if I only had a special ed department on my campus or an education department, but actually by going through work study and career services, you have found people that typically might not have even thought of themselves as being peer mentors, that are coming from a range of undergraduate programs, right?
Yeah, that's true. We have computer science majors are a big one. And a lot of that is because the students want to connect in person with other students, and being a computer, from speaking to these majors, the students don't feel as connected to campus. I'm not sure if that just speaks to the major or the like what comes with it, but they absolutely love our being a mentor, and it's a really great way that they are seeking to participate in getting someone a mentor for themselves, really. So it's pretty incredible.
I think I might have missed a question about the difference between peer mentors and ed coaching. And let me just preface that by saying it can get very blurry, the line between those two roles. But technically, what we're trying to say about educational coaches is the educational coaches are really the individuals that are really helping students academically, and also helping them to like take advantage of career or campus resources and learn how to manage themselves on the campus. And what we're really hoping the peer mentors are doing is actually more helping them to socially navigate around the campus. So although these lines can get very blurry, like I just showed you with the undergraduate students creating those tutorials, some people are using peer mentors for all of the above. We are actually trying to separate out a little bit that peer mentors can be peer mentors, just that, peers. So I wish I had a clean answer for you. But.
Yeah, so the only thing I'll add to that is, you know, a lot of the times I'll find that the ed coaches just naturally want to continue to hang out with the students, and they're excited to be on college campus. So that's something I'll make clear during our ed coach training, is that peer mentor time is peer mentor time, and it's a time for them to sit aside and answer emails or, you know, read a book, but separate themselves from the student so that the student can be independent.
Okay.
We have one more video from Tatiana, and she's going to explain what it was like using our disability services office.
What has it been like using the Ross Center?
The Ross Center is very helpful at the campus when you get to know them. Like when I had my intake appointment, it was just me and Ashley, who's here at the UMass Boston, came with me, and like I told the Ross Center lady what disability I have, what accommodations is helpful me in class, and she understands. And they help you, like you get to take, like recently last week I scheduled an exam for myself without Ashley, so the Ross Center will show you how to do that.
So what I really love about the way Tatiana explained this is how she was able to access the Ross Center, get to know campus, and then she was able, at the time she's done explaining, she was able to access and schedule the exam by herself. So it just shows how that support in practice, how she did it. She is now doing that independently, and all it took was a little bit further connecting to the resources and with that support.
And I think Tatiana is a good example of somebody who, without that supported education, that without that coach helping at first, she might not have understood the whole, the steps that are involved in scheduling her own exam. But so this is a success for us for supported education. This is what we want. We want to see that we provide you some support. We provide you that extra instruction that you might not get otherwise, and then we can fade away because you got it.
Right.
Okay. I just wanted to point out a few things. One is that I was working on another project supporting people in Florida that also have a number of programs. And we wrote a couple of promising practices that were coming out of Florida. And one of them is this promising practice out of North Florida, University of North Florida, where they are really working on this peer mentoring. And they have a large number of peer mentors, and they've come up with a very good model of formal training for them. And then they're able to support many more students. Their particular focus is students with autism. And they've had a lot of success. So I actually put the link in, I think I have the link here in the resources here, but I wanted to point out to you that this is a very short read. This is a 2-page fact sheet, but it really explains how they adopted, why they adopted peer mentoring and how they went about it. And they are accessing a formal training, a digital training. So, and that information is in there too. So I just wanted to point that out. If you don't mind, thank you, Ashely. If you don't mind doing the rest of the slides for me. So these are some references and resources. All of these, well, most of them can be found on Think College, but if not, I've put the full citation here so you can find them. So anything that we referenced in today's presentation is in here. And this is also where we drew information from. And as I said, California has had some work with supported education. So I put that link in here, and I did reference it a few times. So did Temple University, and I've put that in there as well. But I also did put in a couple of resources that are on our Think College site for peer mentor programs, because that is, you know, ideally, that's what we're really going for, is to sort of develop these peer mentor programs. But there are some students that really benefit from having, you know, really learning how to be an academic student. That can be very new for them, and they just need more support to learn those skills and strategies. I'm going to look back here for a second at a question. Does the education coach contact a student to follow up with the student's educational progress to assist proactively? And is this done on a consistent basis? Does he?
I can answer that question. So ideally, yes, that's what we want when we train ed coach, but due to staffing, sometimes that's not the case. So when we talk to our local districts about who's going to be the ed coach for our students, this is a part of the conversation. Not only who is the coach, but how much time is that staff member going to devote to the student during the week, even on days that they're not on campus? Are they going to be in touch over email? Is there going to be a requirement that the student lets them know everything that they accomplish? Like, how is that collaboration going to work? I've had districts handle it differently. Some districts will, you know, pass along what's needed to complete to a different staff member at the school. So there's a couple students who are supporting the student back at the high school, but there's one student who's attending our program with the student. So I would say it depends, but like you said, it does need to be done on a consistent basis. So I'd say that's our biggest, the biggest thing that we try to push.
And I just wanted to clarify too that Ashely and I are working in Massachusetts, where we have legislative funding that's making it possible to do inclusive, what they call inclusive dual enrollment or college-based transition services. So we are working with a lot of students who are still eligible for transition services, and part of their transition services is going to college. And we are trying to say, why not just have all your transition services at college? You can get everything done there. Independent living, academics, and your social connections. But we are also very well aware that that is the minority, and that many more people are supporting students who have exited high school. And Ashely has experience working with students that have exited, and we are well aware of that. In any case, we still really believe that supported education, particularly peer mentoring, can be very beneficial to a lot of students. Ashely, you can move the slide, I think, if you don't mind. Okay, well, that's really it as far as the information that we wanted to share. We are both very happy to stay for any questions or comments or examples that you have. The one other thing I will say is that we have developed formal training for educational coaches and peer mentors in Massachusetts, but we've designed it so that we can expand it beyond Massachusetts. We have it on Canvas right now. And one of the things that we've learned, and maybe some of you know this too, is that we trained a lot of people last spring, a lot of educational coaches and peer mentors, and 1 year later, they're all different. So what we've learned is there's a lot of turnover with the coach and the peer mentors. And so we always need to be prepared to train them. And I'll leave it at that.
Great. Thank you so much for the presentation, Dr. Paiewonsky and Ashely Luce. I've noticed that Patrick, your hand was raised from earlier in the presentation. Is there a question, Patrick? And I'd like to say to everyone else, if there are questions, please keep the questions coming. While we're waiting for questions, I will drop a link into the chat so that people can begin to provide us with feedback about the presentation today. So yeah, questions, feel free to ask any questions you may have. While the presentation was ongoing, I was wondering how the audience was thinking about, so there's going to be the SEEP 2.0 funding. So Student Equity and Achievement Program funding. How many of you were thinking about using some of that funding, persuading your administrators to use some of that funding to help facilitate the availability of education coaches and the peer mentors to support students? I noticed, Shalita, yes, you're asking for me to reach out to you after this. I will. I think there's a question in the Q&A. I see hands. I don't know. Let me see if I can. I will allow, I don't know which one of you was first, but I will allow Kelly to speak. Do you want to speak, or do you want to put the question or comment into the chat? I'll hit the allow to talk and see if this works.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay,
Yeah.
hi. This is great. I love what you guys are doing. So we are an organization that actually has the paid staff to work at the community colleges with that blend of peer mentors and education coaches together. So that piece. So in California, Regional Center pays for it. And I would love to see the training if you would share that. Like, can I email you guys? Because I know we've been doing that training with our mentors to help the student, because it is all the skills, right? That's what we're seeing. It's the soft skills. I have students who can barely handle one class or 5 classes, but if they don't have the soft skills, they are really struggling with being successful in college. And so wondering how you guys are kind of tackling that with your peer mentors.
You know, Kelly, first of all, Ashely does direct training on the ground. She's doing training with the coaches. And then we also provide this, like these mini courses. And I'd be happy to show you this brochure that we were using to promote, because it has the topics that we're addressing.
Okay, great.
I'd be very happy to share that with you.
Excellent. I'll be emailing you guys then after this. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I needed to unmute myself. Okay, and then looks like Miriam, I will allow you to speak now if you'd like to do that. So here you go.
Hi, thank you so much for this great presentation, for organizing and for giving presentation. I have a question for Ed Coach and peer mentor. Do you provide as an accommodation? Do the students, is it the compulsory that you link the student with the Ed Coach, or the student has an option as an accommodation to go for Ed Coach or peer mentor? How do you link them?
So for us, it's a requirement for the program for there to be an Ed Coach, but I know through our Disability Services Office, they do have a peer mentor position that works specifically for students who are registered with that office. So we use our peer mentors as the social piece to our Ed Coaches in our program, but the Disability Services Office has peer mentors specifically for their registered students. So both models are very similar.
Awesome, thank you.
And I did see, yes, I absolutely will share. I will find a way of getting the brochure to Will, and then Will, I presume you could disseminate that.
Certainly.
Okay, and also Laura, I see your comment about student workers, required student workers to complete their confidentially and video signed agreement. But somebody else was also talking about the liability issue has been raised, and that has been raised. I think what we, to the best of our ability, we try to recommend that people follow what protocols there are on their campuses, but there are so many students that are doing either volunteer work or paid positions. So there's bound to be a protocol to refer to.
Yeah, so that's good advice, to use whatever the campus or district policy is. I wonder, for people who are on the participant list, you're a part of this, you're providing either education, coaching, or peer mentoring on your campus. If you could share with Lisa and others, all of us really, how you are handling the liability issue, we would love to hear that. It's a very important issue. So if some of you would like to share how you're managing this, navigating this, we'd be happy to hear it.
And I will say the way I navigated it, because confidentiality was like the first question that I had when I started developing the peer mentoring, was talking to other offices with similar positions. That's kind of, especially that disability services position I mentioned. Anything that involves confidentiality, a lot of times the office will be able to share how they handle it, and you can just kind of mimic it.
Yeah, so Lisa is further explaining that, you know, some within her institution, they view students with intellectual and developmental disabilities as vulnerable. And so to protect, you know, they're trying their best to protect students. So how are, I believe Miriam, or was it Kelly, were you saying that you are providing some of these services? If confidentiality is something that you dealt with, how did you do that? Oh, I see Kelly has placed a response into the chat. We have an MOU set up with each school. We have our staff go through the HIPAA training, and we also have our staff get background checks as volunteers on campus. All of our staff are paid. Thank you for that response, Kelly. If there are any other comments that you think are germane to this, please feel free to chime in. And others, we'd love to hear from you on this.
The only other thing that comes to mind kind of related to this is the student code of conduct. We'll share that with the students who are in our program, but also we'll remind our peer mentors of the student code of conduct too during training.
So Kelly, I don't know if you want me to unmute you. I can do that. There's a question about which institution you're from. I'll unmute you a minute. And then there's another question. Maybe Ashely and Dr. Paiewonsky, you could take a look at the next question while I'm unmuting Kelly. So Kelly, I think you're unmuted.
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay.
We can, yes.
So we're with Ability First. So we have a college to career program, and we started at Pasadena City College. We're now with LA City College. We actually have a student at UCLA. With the pandemic, we've been able to do remote support. And those are people that usually go through our program. And so ours is paid. All of our staff are paid. And so somebody asked, do they do the accommodation academic counseling? We kind of follow the model like you guys do of what we do is we connect the students with what the services are on campus. And so then we coach them how to get a tutor, we coach them how to use the library, whatever it is. And so what our, they're called education coaches is helping the student become a college student, as well as helping them bridge to becoming a young adult. We see a lot of our students, by the time they get to college, they know every bad thing about them. Their IEP is negative based, right? It is just, they can tell me all of their challenges. They can tell me all of these things. So we really focus on person-centered planning, where we're talking to the student of what are you good at? What is important to you? What are you willing to work for? And helping that student kind of identify who they are. Because by the time, you guys probably see this too, by the time they get to you through an IEP program, that's as much as our first year with a student, of helping them understand they have skills and talents and dreams that they can reach. So that's part of what our education coach is doing, as well as saying, this is a syllabus and your mom's not going to do it for you, right? Let's figure this out. This is Canvas. How do you use Canvas? And so our coaches do daily, we do 3 different debriefs a day with our students, where we're meeting with them every 2 hours saying, okay, what is your goal for 2 hours? So really helping them kind of work their way away from us. So that's kind of our program. When you're saying, what is it? We're doing a little bit of both, as
Yeah.
well as peers.
Sorry, Kelly, if you would indulge us, what ultimately funds the services you provide? Are you a regional center vendor?
So we're regional center vendored through 3-4 regional centers now. And then we've also started becoming the transition program for the 18 to 22-year-olds for high schools. As some of you guys know, the high school as robust as some families would like. And so we become the program for them.
Do you mind dropping a link to your
I can't hear you.
organization in
I'm
the
sorry.
chat?
Well,
Oh,
I
you
just-
cannot? Did you say you can't hear me?
I can hear you, Will.
Yeah, I don't know. Let's see if I can. Oh, okay. So Kelly, if it's okay, if you could put the link to your organization in the chat, that would be great. Or maybe I can reach out to you via email, if that works. That's interesting. It looks like she's speaking, but I don't see anything happening.
can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Yeah.
It was weird. I could see you were talking. I couldn't hear you. It's like somehow it all got taken away. I'm sorry. Okay.
I'm glad that you persisted. I'm glad that you're back. So do you mind providing information about your organization in the chat? Maybe
Sure, I can do that. Yeah.
We'd appreciate that. Thank you. Was there someone else?
Looks like Lisa found it.
Oh, yeah. Something that Kelly mentioned too, I think is important. Just the idea that when the students get to campus, not everything is as planned as it is back at the high school with the transition programs. And even just that sense of freedom is new and exciting. So,
Yeah.
Great, thank you. And then there was a question above. Do your counselors focus on accommodations, or do they also offer academic counseling? I'm not sure if that question was for Kelly or.
I think Kelly answered that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. All right, are there more questions? We have some time. While we're waiting for additional questions, again, thank you so much, Dr. Paiewonsky and Ashely, for sharing the wealth of your knowledge with the California community colleges. I see Kelly has said they also help parents learn how to let students be independent. Self-determination is critical. So it's important for the students to be expressing what they want, that they want to be in college, what their goals will be, and what their outcomes will be.
Yeah, and I just want to say I really appreciate that point, because we've often talked about on the parent side, what we're also preparing parents for, hopefully through IEPs or before they come to the college, is that dignity of risk, but also calculated risk. How are we helping students to stay safe? And what if they didn't feel comfortable? And where do they go? And who do they talk to? And, you know, really helping parents to understand that that is also part of our work of building mature college students.
Thank you. I'm still noticing hands raised. Kelly and Miriam, were those hands raised from before, or would you like to? Okay. Anyone else? Laura Baca asked a question earlier. Laura Baca is one of our experienced folks at a college to career program who has some really good professional and lived experience as an education coach. So I thought her question was a really prescient one, the one regarding what's the difference between a peer mentor and an education coach. If there are any additional questions, please feel free to throw them at us. I see a hand. Whose hand is this? It takes me a while to scroll to see where the hand is actually. Sorry. Whose hand am I missing?
Will, I see a question from Anthony.
Okay, sure.
Are there exceptions where ed coaches are providing the tutoring? If so, do the students and family support network become reliant on where it delays their transition? You know, to the most part, we really are very cognizant of this idea of not becoming over reliant on supports. So particularly our student coach agreement is meant to be revisited every semester. So the student says they need this support this semester. Okay, the student and coach agree to that. But then by the end of the semester, before the beginning one, now what do you need support on? So we really are from the very beginning looking at it's clear you might need some support. We're happy to give it to you, but how are we fading it? Because it's not assumed that you need that support. You're learning, so you might not need that support, you know, indefinitely. So I think that's one of the ways we're trying to handle that.
The question after that one is, are there any college level training programs to train ed coaches and mentors?
If I could just jump in with a little bit of that, I wish I could remember the name of this peer mentoring, but that's why I put that fact sheet in there from University of North Florida, because they are using a generic kind of peer mentoring that there's 3 different levels of this kind of peer mentoring. And so I would take a look at that fact sheet because they've had some real success using it. And that might be one approach to take.
Laura, I see your hand. If you don't mind, I will allow you to speak because maybe we need a little more elaboration on your question. You're asking about whether or not there's a workshop for parents at the beginning. So can I unmute you and then do you mind elaborating a little? You're unmuted, Laura.
Can you hear me now?
We can, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you, because I was typing in my notes saying I made a mistake. I knew I wasn't clear. You know, a lot of times what happens, and actually I've adjusted what I was going to ask, but a lot of times I've noticed what's been happening with some of our students about mid-semester, because we've been really focusing on, we've had some independent ed coach workshops that talked about adulting. We have our campus resource class, or not campus, excuse me, community resource class where organizations are coming in to speak. And then we have our communications class. And as students are beginning to learn to communicate more, problems are arising at home. And so the parents are not realizing some of how this is as students growing in the process. And this has happened, I've noticed more so this first year and maybe with some second year students as they begin to grow. So I feel like maybe we do a little disservice to the parents by not letting them maybe halfway through kind of get why some of their students are acting more independently, because that's part of the goal of the program. Does anyone do any type of a check-in with the parents, have a workshop or anything that they offer? That's my question.
We host, I put it in the chat, but we host an orientation for our parents at the beginning of the semester. Kind of wait till the end of September so that they have more, the student gets a chance to share with their parents what's going on campus before we start that conversation with the parents. And then that's more just broadly what the program is like. And it really goes into, it's the same that has been shared here today. What are those roles and what are their responsibilities of the ed coaches and the peer mentors? That's the question I probably get the most from parents is, who are the mentors and what is their training like? Because they might get a little nervous as to who this new student is working with their son or daughter.
I know that we do an orientation. I don't think that we wait a month in to do it, which might be a good suggestion. Usually the parents are wanting to know if, how their student will be safe on campus. I mean, that's been one of the questions that over the last 2 years, we haven't had to worry about, but it's starting to come up again as we're doing our new interviews. But yeah, that would be my one thing, is to see how, not just that first time, but it's a reminder, because they haven't changed yet. It's when they start to change that the parents don't remember that what they're learning is creating an opportunity for them to change. So
Yeah.
that's just my thought, maybe a way to revisit it somewhere down the line.
Yeah, I would say the feedback from the first semester of the same parents to the second semester, they get it then, you know, come second semester, they get what's happening, they see the progress of the student, and they're more trusting in just the program in general and the student attending campus. One other thing I'd suggest is I've opened up campus visits with parents. So if the student wants to have their parent join them on the campus visit, you know, that's one thing, a lot of new college students have their parents with them on their first campus visit anyway. And that has eased a lot of nerves for parents too.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you for that. We have another comment from Kelly in the chat. She indicated that they have a 6-week discovery program prior to the semester starting. They are working with students and working on their skills in the community. We meet with the family after the 6 weeks and ask what are the changes they are seeing. So sort of before and after, right? Like what improvement is being seen. And it's good to continuously evaluate and to measure, because that's how we know if we're making any improvements. That makes sense, totally.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you to Dr. Maria Paiwanski and to Ashely Luce. It's been wonderful. Thank you for, again, sharing from the wealth of your knowledge with the California community colleges. Thank you to the 28 individuals that have hung out here with us to the very end of this. If you have additional questions, Dr. Paiewonsky is really good at getting back to me with responses and with sharing resources. So if you have questions, please let us know. Thank you so much. Again, please complete the evaluation. It's how we know that what we're providing is helpful, and it helps us also to determine areas for additional webinars or topics that are of interest to you. Thank you so much again for joining us, and have a safe and wonderful rest of the day and week.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye-bye.
I did see resources, and I am going to get to them, like Anthony, the agreement is coming. Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.